Picture the darkness of a moonless night in June 1462. The air in the Wallachian forests is thick, humid, and smells of pine resin and nervous sweat. You are a soldier in the greatest army the world has ever seen, the Ottoman war machine that shattered the walls of Constantinople. But tonight, you are not a conqueror. You are prey. The silence of the forest is not peaceful. It is heavy, suffocating, pregnant with a violence you cannot see but can feel in your marrow. Suddenly, the darkness screams. Torches ignite thousands of them, turning the pitch black into a flickering, hellish orange. The sound of drums and trumpets erupts from every direction, a cacophony designed to shatter the mind before the sword even cuts the flesh. And through the smoke and the fire rides a demon. This is not a myth. This is not a vampire story from a Victorian novel. This is the Night Attack at Târgoviște, the moment when one man, Vlad III Dracula, decided that if he could not defeat an empire with soldiers, he would break it with terror. To understand how we arrived at this apocalyptic scene, we must step back and look at the two titans standing on opposite sides of history. On one side sits Mehmed II, the conqueror. At just 21 years old, he had done the impossible. He had taken Constantinople, ending the Roman Empire and declaring himself the Caesar of Rome. Mehmed was a man of supreme intellect and boundless ambition, commanding an army that numbered over 100,000 men janissaries, sapahis, and heavy artillery that could level mountains. He believed he was the sword of God, destined to sweep through Europe and turn the Black Sea into an Ottoman lake. To him, the small principality of Wallachia was nothing more than a speed bump on the road to Hungary and Rome. On the other side stood Vlad III, a voivoda prince of Wallachia. But he was also a man shaped by trauma. As a child, he had been given as a hostage to the Ottoman court to ensure his father's loyalty. He spent his formative years in the shadow of the very man he was now fighting. Vlad knew the Ottomans better than they knew themselves. He spoke their language, he studied their tactics, and he understood their psychology. He knew that the janissaries were disciplined, but he also knew that even the bravest man has a breaking point. Vlad did not have an army of 100,000. He had perhaps 30,000 men, many of them peasants armed with farming tools. But Vlad possessed something Mehmed did not, a total lack of restraint. He was a member of the Order of the Dragon, sworn to defend Christendom, yet his methods were anything but holy. He understood that when you are outnumbered 3-1, you do not fight a war of attrition. You fight a war of the mind. The conflict began, as many do, with a dispute over money and pride. For years, Wallachia had paid a tribute of gold and young boys to the Sultan. In 1459, Vlad stopped paying. When Mehmed sent envoys to collect the tribute and demand Vlad's submission, the prince's response was immediate and gruesome. Legend tells us the envoys refused to remove their turbans in Vlad's presence, citing religious custom. Vlad, with a dark wit that would define his legacy, commanded that if they would not remove their hats for a prince, he would ensure they never had to remove them again. He had their turbans nailed to their skulls. This was not just an act of cruelty. It was a declaration of war. It was a slap in the face of the most powerful man on earth. Mehmed could not let such an insult stand. He gathered an army that shook the earth as it marched, a force so large that contemporary chroniclers claimed it drank rivers dry. The invasion of Wallachia in the spring of 1462 was supposed to be a parade. The Ottomans expected to march to the capital, Târgoviște, depose Vlad, and install his younger, more pliable brother, Radu the Handsome, on the throne. But as the Ottoman columns crossed the Danube, they found something unsettling. The land was empty. Vlad had employed a scorched earth tactic of absolute totality. He had evacuated the population, burned the crops, and poisoned the wells. The massive Ottoman army, reliant on foraging to feed its thousands of horses and men, found themselves marching through a wasteland. Hunger began to gnaw at the soldiers. But worse than the hunger was the silence. Vlad's light cavalry would strike from the tree line, firing volleys of arrows before vanishing back into the deep woods. They were ghosts, bleeding the Ottoman giant one drop at a time. The psychological toll was immense. As the Ottomans pushed deeper into Wallachia, the heat of the summer became oppressive. Marshes bred mosquitoes, and disease began to ripple through the ranks. But it was the sights along the road that truly eroded their spirit. Vlad had left markers for the invaders. Stragglers or scouts sent out by Mehmed were found days later, impaled on high stakes along the roadside. It was a grotesque warning: turn back or this is your fate. The suffering of the victims was prolonged, a deliberate engineering of agony designed to terrify those who watched. Mehmed, however, was iron-willed. He pressed on, his eyes fixed on Târgoviște. He believed that once he took the capital, the resistance would crumble. He did not realize that Vlad had no intention of defending the capital his walls in a traditional siege. Vlad knew that inside a fortress, he would be trapped. Instead, Vlad was tracking the Ottoman army, shadowing them like a wolf stalking a wounded bison. He was looking for a moment of weakness, a lapse in discipline. And he found it just outside the city of Târgoviște, where the Ottomans made camp in a valley hemmed in by the dense forests. Here is where the chronicles reveal the sheer audacity of the man. On the night before the attack, stories say that Vlad himself entered the Ottoman camp in disguise. Fluent in Turkish and dressed as a Sipahi cavalryman, he walked among his enemies, gauging their numbers, mapping the layout of the tents, and locating the Sultan's royal pavilion. He saw the fear in their eyes, he smelled the desperation. He realized that while the Ottoman army was massive, it was also unwieldy. In the dark, their numbers would count for nothing. If he could cut off the head of the snake, if he could kill Mehmed, the body would die. The plan was set for the night of June 17th. Vlad divided his forces. He would lead the main charge himself, aiming directly for the Sultan's tent. The objective was not victory in the traditional sense, it was assassination. It was a suicide mission disguised as a battle. The sun set, and the Ottoman camp settled into an uneasy rest. The sentries were alert, but the sheer size of the encampment gave them a false sense of security. How could a few thousand Wallachians dare to attack a force of this magnitude? Then, the storm broke. Vlad's cavalry smashed into the Ottoman lines with the force of a tidal wave. They didn't come with the discipline of a field army. They came with the fury of madmen. The Wallachians carried torches, setting fire to the tents, creating a wall of flame and smoke that disoriented the sleepers. The air filled with the screams of men dying in their bedclothes. The Ottomans, confused and panicked, began to fight each other in the darkness. In the chaos, friend and foe looked alike. The disciplined formations of the Janissaries broke down into desperate, isolated brawls. Vlad was at the center of the vortex. Mounted on a black charger, he cut a path of destruction toward the center of the camp. His men roared his name, a psychological hammer blow to the superstitious Ottoman conscripts who had heard the rumors of his supernatural cruelty. They reached the center of the camp. Vlad spotted the large, ornate tents of the high command. With a roar, he and his elite guard charged, slaughtering the bodyguards, hacking through the silken ropes. They believed they had found the Sultan. But in the confusion of the night, and perhaps due to the deceptive layout of the Ottoman camp, they had made a fatal error. They were attacking the tents of the Grand Viziers, Mahmud Pasha and Isaac. The Sultan's tent was further away. Guarded by the elite of the elite, the Solaks, the Sultan's personal archers. Mehmed, awakened by the carnage, did not flee. This is the mark of the conqueror. While his army dissolved into panic around him, he stood firm. He rallied his Janissaries, forming a tight defensive circle around his tent. They stood like a rock in the rushing river of the attack, their shields locked, their scimitars hacking at anything that came out of the dark. The battle raged for hours. It was a meat grinder. The Wallachians, realizing they had missed the Sultan and that the sun was approaching, signaled a retreat. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, melting back into the forests before the Ottoman cavalry could organize a pursuit. The sun rose on a scene of absolute devastation. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead, many killed by their own comrades in the confusion. The camp was a smoking ruin. The invincible aura of the Ottoman army had been pierced. They had been humiliated in their own beds by a force a fraction of their size. But the true horror was yet to come. Mehmed, shaken but resolved, ordered the army to march on Târgoviște. He expected a final stand. He expected Vlad to be waiting on the walls. But when they arrived at the capital, the gates were open. The city was silent. There was no army. There was only the forest of the impaled, stretching for miles outside the city. Lining the road on both sides was a sight that would sear itself into the history books. Vlad had taken 20,000 Ottoman prisoners captured during the previous months of skirmishing and impaled them. It was a tableau of hell. The stakes were arranged by rank, with higher stakes for the officers. Men, women, and even children were displayed in varying stages of decomposition. The smell was overpowering, a physical wall of rot that hit the Ottoman soldiers like a physical blow. At the center of this forest, on the highest stake, was the rotting corpse of Hamza Bey, the envoy Vlad had captured months earlier. He was still wearing his silk robes, a grotesque mockery of his station. The effect on the Ottoman army was immediate and devastating. These were hardened soldiers, men who had seen the gutters of Constantinople run red with blood. But this was something else. This was a psychological violation. It was a message that said, "I do not play by your rules. I am not afraid of death, and I will make you beg for it." The Greek historian Laonikos Chalkokondyles wrote that upon seeing this sight, the Sultan, the man who had conquered the Romans, was overcome with amazement. He reportedly said, "I cannot take the land away from a man who does such things to manage his kingdom and his people. A man who does this is capable of anything." It was the breaking point. The army, already demoralized by hunger, thirst, and the night attack, refused to go further. The terror was absolute. Mehmed, realizing that conquering this land would cost him more than it was worth, ordered the retreat. Vlad Dracula had won. He had defeated the superpower of the age not with superior numbers, but with the weaponization of fear. He had turned the Ottoman army into terror itself. However, history is rarely a fairy tale with a happy ending. The victory at Târgoviște was a tactical masterpiece, but a strategic failure. Vlad had saved his country, but he had exhausted his resources. He had no friends left. The boyars, the nobility of Wallachia, were tired of his brutal authoritarianism. Mehmed, being a master strategist, realized he didn't need to fight Vlad with swords. He could fight him with politics. He left behind Vlad's brother, Radu the Handsome. Radu was everything Vlad was not: charming, diplomatic, and backed by Ottoman gold. Radu turned the nobility against Vlad. He promised them peace. He promised them an end to the impalements. Slowly, the support for the dragon crumbled. Vlad was forced to flee to Hungary, seeking aid from King Matthias Corvinus. But in a final twist of betrayal, Corvinus imprisoned him. It was politically expedient for the Hungarian king to keep the Ottoman money flowing and present Vlad as a monster, a loose cannon who impeded peace. Vlad rotted in a prison for 12 years, while his brother ruled Wallachia as an Ottoman puppet. Vlad would eventually return to the throne for a brief third reign in 1476, but he was a shadow of his former self. He died in battle, likely betrayed by his own men, his head sent to Constantinople to be displayed on a spike, a final, ironic grimace of fate. The legacy of Târgoviște, however, endured. It became a lesson in the limits of imperial power. It showed that an empire, no matter how vast, can be halted by the sheer will of a people fighting for their survival. But it also left a dark stain on history, blurring the line between heroism and monstrosity. For centuries, the West remembered Vlad as a sadist, a caricature of evil that would eventually inspire Bram Stoker's Count Dracula. But in Romania, the memory is different. There, he is not a vampire. He is the strict but just ruler who stood alone against the storm when all of Europe trembled. This brings us to the deeper philosophical question that Târgoviște forces us to confront. What is the price of freedom? Vlad the Impaler was willing to sacrifice his humanity to save his nation. He became a monster to fight a monster. We often like to sanitize our history, to paint our heroes in white and our villains in black. But the Night Attack teaches us that history is gray. It is painted in the mud and the blood of a dark forest in Wallachia. It forces us to ask, if the survival of your people depended on it, would you be capable of becoming the thing you hate? In the end, the Night Attack at Târgoviște remains one of the most visceral examples of asymmetric warfare in human history. It was the night the dragon breathed fire, and for one brief moment, the world held its breath. If you want to explore more battles where strategy and psychology collided to change the map of the world, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. We are committed to unearthing the gritty, unfiltered reality of our past. Until next time,